Well, let's start this thing right. Put in a little zen. And we're going to start conversation about self-defense and the non-aggression principle. And maybe I'll even tell you a story about how I decided to start studying martial arts and self-defense. And I eventually earned a black belt in Aikido, which is cool. You know, it's definitely an accomplishment, and it shows if you have a black belt in a martial art, it shows that you're dedicated to that art. A lot of people think that having a black belt is some sort of acknowledgement of mastery. And really, if you talk to many martial artists, they'll say that earning that black belt is really, what is going on here? Check 1, 2. Okay, we're still good. Cut that out. A lot of martial artists will tell you that earning the black belt was kind of just the beginning of their journey, and when they first started to actually understand a few things and get a grip on the way your body needs to move in that particular art, and maybe there's some mastery over the basics, over the fundamentals. You know, I mean, if you're in jiu-jitsu and you have a black belt, surely you know how to do a pretty good rear naked choke, or, you know, there's 3 or 4 different moves that if you had a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and you didn't know how to do, you know, obviously that would not be a good thing. You have to have a really good start on being able to flow with your art. For Aikido, my dojo was a little different than most Aikido dojos. If you dive into Aikido, there are a lot of, I guess you could call, spiritual dojos that are actually, some of them are actually pacifistic, meaning they truly only believe that your only right is to, you actually have the obligation to not harm the person that's attacking you. And some people take the philosophy of the founder and, in my opinion, twist it to the point where they're saying, no, the founder actually said, you have to try to not, if there's someone attacking you, not only do you have to defend yourself, but you have to ensure that person doesn't get hurt as well. Now that's a little extreme. I don't know how many dojos actually practice that and preach that, but there is that element in Aikido. It's not Tai Chi in the sense that, you know, most of the practitioners of Tai Chi, you know, they do it for their own movement, although it is a self-defense practice. You know, but you know, it's kind of developed into a practice of mindfulness and energy and movement and all that. Aikido's definitely, you know, it's definitely around self-defense, and there are some really, really good practical self-defense techniques that are actually very viable in defending yourself, especially when it comes to like grabs. And you know, if somebody grabs you and you're an Aikidoka, you'll know what to do. You should know what to do, especially if you have a black belt. Now, if somebody punches you or tries to take you to the ground and grapple you on the ground, Aikido doesn't have a lot of answers for that, in my opinion. So back to what I was saying, is my dojo was a little different in that we tried to cover striking and grappling as well as a lot of traditional Aikido, the movements and the balance and you know, my sensei, who's one of my best friends now, has the philosophy that Aikido has a lot of great fundamentals of self-defense in its stances and postures and balance that sets you up to learn other forms in a really good way. And I found that, I mean, we had another instructor who came in and taught grappling and striking, and we practiced a lot of different kinds of forms. I mean, we learned some savate, which is some like kind of low kicking techniques. Some jujitsu, but more like wrestling and grappling, and then just general striking techniques. Not a lot of high kicks, because the theory in the dojo was that they're low probability, and they're easy to defend, although they're easy to defend if you know they're coming. So I used to practice Taekwondo when I was a teenager, and I have a decent right leg side kick and a pretty good round kick, and I can see how those would come in handy sometimes, especially when you're trying to create distance. But again, it's balance. If somebody grabs your leg and knows what they're doing, it's kind of hard to defend yourself, because you're only on one leg at that point. Aikido really teaches you to keep your foundation, keep your base, and always keep balanced, which is very hard to defend against when somebody is balanced and grounded. So that's what I have my black belt in. That's what I studied. 10 years of that, and but it all came to a head for me from an incident that happened in my studio. And I guess since we have a little time here, I'll tell you the story, because it's kind of interesting. So I rented a room to a guy. He was apparently a rapper, and he had a producer friend, and they had a little vocal booth in their studio, and they did do some recording and some music production, but it was more, the studio was more used as kind of a hangout, and it was fine for a while. I mean, he paid his rent, he didn't cause any problems like that. But so one night when I was there, one of the kids that I had seen in the room with the tenant, the leaseholder, came up to me and said, "Hey, can you let me in the room, because I locked myself out of my room?" And I said, "I can't do that. I got to have permission from the leaseholder, because you're not on the lease." And so we got him on the phone, and we talked to him, and he said, "Yeah, go ahead, let him in." And so I let him in. Didn't think anything of it. And about 2 weeks later, I came into my studio, and his girlfriend was outside the studio. I was introduced to her a week or so prior as his girlfriend, to her as his girlfriend. So I had been introduced, and I knew who she was. I recognized her. And she had a black eye, and kind of a slight black eye, and she looked in rough shape. She didn't look good. And she said, "Hey, can you let me into the studio? I just got back from Vegas," and I think she might have said that she got mugged or something. I'm pretty sure that she said that something bad happened to her, and she just wanted to wait for this guy. And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't do that, because you're not on the lease." And she said, "Okay, I'll just wait." And another hour went by or so, and she came to me again. She says, "Hey, can you please let me in?" And I had texted and called the leaseholder, and he wasn't answering. And so I called again, and I left a message, and I said, "Look, what's her name? It is outside your room. She looks pretty roughed up. Kind of feeling bad for her. I want to let her into your room so she has some place to, sit down and have some privacy." I said, "I'm going to let her in. From what I understand, she is your girlfriend. Please call me as soon as possible if that's not okay." So I let her in. A week goes by, and he calls me on the phone, just acting like the world had ended. He told me that this woman that I had let into his room had stolen an $8,500 chain and a pendant from him. And he needed that replaced by me right away, or something bad was going to happen to me. And I said, oh, okay. Well, first of all, you're going to have to file a police report, and I need to get a copy of that police report, and I can potentially submit it to my insurance. I'm not guaranteeing, but first thing you have to do is file a police report for the theft. And maybe the police can help you recover the chain. So he kind of hemmed and hawed at that for about a week or so, and he called me back and kind of threatened me again, and I basically said there's nothing I can do until I can, I know that there was a police report filed. So eventually he did. He went down to the local police department and filed a police report, and he told me he did that. And I went down to the police department and got a copy of the police report, and there was no name with the theft. There was, I don't know her name. It said I don't know her name. I had met her in Florida, and she came back with me and was staying with me, but I didn't know her name, or I didn't know her last name, or something like that. And that just, obviously that's pretty fishy and made me not trust it. And I kind of just thought it would go away, but of course it didn't. Called me later and threatened me with violence and physical harm and called me names. And this was at a period of time where I definitely wouldn't call myself a pacifist, but I had no self-defense techniques. I had still had a lot of trust in the world. There was part of me that believed him, but I really knew that there was really not a whole lot I could do. Yeah, could he have sued me and said I let her into his room? Yeah, he could have. And I was kind of waiting for him to do that, because that's what any, law-abiding person would do. If they really thought I was at fault, they would sue me for it. And I kind of looked at it like, well, yeah, I made a mistake, but I mean, she was his girlfriend. He'd introduced me as his girlfriend, and I'm sorry she stole from him. And I was kind of, I had kind of made offers to him to give him a couple months rent free just for his trouble, but he wasn't having it. He wanted $8,500 cash, and he wasn't going to take a penny less. And we even went down to a jewelry store at some point. I said, well, meet me down at the jewelry store and let me talk to somebody. And so we went down there, which is just stupid by me. I would never do that now, but, and this jeweler showed us the pendant. He said, this is the one I had. It was a duplicate or whatever. And I don't know how much it was, close to $8,500. And he said, yeah, I want this. And if you don't get it to me in the next week, something's bad going to happen. And he called me again and again. And finally I said, hey, why don't you come down to the MPI, the NIP, the neighborhood something program. And they have volunteers that'll help you mediate a situation like this. I just basically said, look, it's just not contractually my problem. You should have had insurance on your stuff, and I can't compensate you for this. I can help you a little bit, but I'm not buying you a new chain. And he actually said to me and to the mediator, I am willing to go to jail over this, which of course implies that he's willing to hurt me and commit assault on me if I don't do what he wants. And I just walked out of the mediation, and the mediators were just terrible. They didn't help at all. And I felt like he threatened an assault on me. And it was just kind of a gray area. And I walked out and I just said, look, you got to move out. I'm going to evict you. And there's nothing I'm going to do. And he called me again, yelling and screaming and all that. And finally I just said, hey, meet me over at the studio. I want to talk one last time, and I'm just going to tell you what's up, And so we sat down in the lobby of my studio, and I just said, look, I'm not doing this. I'm willing to help you. I'm willing to give you a couple months rent free for your trouble if you want to stay. Otherwise, and he hadn't paid rent now for 2 months or something like that. And in the meantime, I was talking to another one of my tenants who was a criminal defense lawyer, actually kind of a famous one. And he had a band, and he was practicing in the big room once a week. And I was consulting with him, and he just told me, you need to evict him, you need to stop all communication, don't negotiate with him. And so eventually I drew the line with him, but the threats and the calls and the texts were not stopping, and I was scared. I didn't know what to do. And then during that last conversation that he and I had, when he was walking out the door, he decided to turn around and drop his water bottle on the ground and basically pose up to me, like fists clenched, and like he was going to swing at me. And he was probably like 6 inches from my face. And I had nothing. I didn't know to put my hands up. I didn't know to, get him out of my space and create some distance. If he would have swung at me, I probably would have just curled up into a ball on the feet in a fetal position and let him kick me. I mean, I just had nothing. And thankfully, he didn't try to swing at me, and he eventually left, and I had to acquiesce to his. I said, we'll go down to the jewelry store on Monday and, see if we can get something going. Because I lied to him just to get him to go away. And after that, I knew I had to do something. In the back of my mind, I just knew that I didn't ever want to be in that position again. So to wrap that story, this lawyer was in my building on a Sunday when he usually practices, and he said, hey, what did that guy look like? And I described him. He said, I think I saw him with a girl in your studio. And I said, oh, really? Interesting. And so I thought maybe it was a different girl. But I looked back at the footage, at the security footage, and found a clear picture of him with this girl. So he was still with this girl. And it became obvious at that point that it was a grift. He was trying to extort money from me. So I printed out the picture and slipped it under his door with a note that said, you have 7 days to get out. You haven't paid rent for 2 months. Otherwise, I'm going to start proper eviction process. And he promptly left. And I actually saw him one time while he was moving his stuff out, and he didn't say anything. He knew the jig was up, so to speak. And another thing happened. I was at a retreat, we'll call it. And it was a retreat where a lot of drumming was happening by my group of people. And it's in northern Wisconsin, and there are some neighbors up there that take offense to the perpetual drumming that happens over a period of days. And we had gotten the community that I was in had gotten some negative feedback about that drumming, and how I don't know if they thought we were devil worshippers or something like that, and I was staying in a tent outside in these pines in the back, and one night we had gone all to bed, and somebody came into the camp and started shooting fireworks off at us, bottle rockets and all kinds of stuff, and it was threatening. I mean, it was you're asleep, and all of a sudden you got fireworks coming within feet of your tent, and explosions and all that kind of stuff. And the next day I brought it up to the group of people, and these are very, I guess you could call them liberal folks, peace-minded folks, and they really didn't want to do anything about it. They just kind of blew it off like it was nothing, and it just didn't sit right with me. And I felt like this stance of pacifism or this stance of not defending yourself or addressing some sort of act of aggression, it just wasn't right. And so when I got back from that retreat, after a couple months, I went to my first Aikido class. I kind of researched some different martial arts, and me being a peace-loving, energy-minded, conscious person, I thought Aikido would be an interesting thing to start out with. And so I started in a dojo in St. Paul and went there for about 6 months, and I liked it. Nothing wrong with it. It was difficult and challenging, and I was finding it interesting and useful to learn to move my body in that way. And it was difficult to get to for me, and they didn't have really good timings, class schedules that didn't line up with my schedule. So I researched another dojo, and it happened to only be about 10 minutes from my studio, and they had a noon class, and I just thought, well, if this dojo is good, I'm going to stay here, because I can just go to the studio and take a lunch break and go take a class. And thankfully, I'm so grateful that I did, because it was the perfect dojo for me. It had the right balance of traditional Aikido and real true self-defense principles and the right mindset. And so I studied there, and that's where I got my black belt, and became part of the community there, and just really had learned a lot and became, I think, proficient in defending myself. I still will try to avoid violent encounters wherever they are as much as I can, unless I have to defend myself or defend somebody, a friend or a family member. But some of the philosophy behind that comes from a guy called Mark Passio. Now, if you look up Mark Passio, he has a whole course on natural law, and he's kind of an anarchist, I think, and he has a lot of opinions about the government and all that stuff. But his presentation on natural law really changed. I don't know if it changed my perspective. It bolstered a lot of what I had thought before, and it also gave me some real insights into what natural law is. And natural law, again, if you really want the expert on this, look up Mark Passio. But if I can put it in a nutshell, his theory, and it's a very researched theory, and it's based in a lot of texts, and his theory is natural law is you will suffer the consequences of your own actions, whether a government or an institutional body steps in to dole out your punishment or your consequence or not. And I think it, kind of what he's saying is you will suffer karmically, or you will suffer by the hand of an institution. One way you will get your punishment, and it's not always instant, but it will happen. And I think his theory is that we don't need institutions to implement law and order so much as we need to just let karma play out. And he probably wouldn't agree with the way I said that, because I'm not as versed in that whole, in natural law, of course, as he is. But that's kind of my understanding of it. And he's a very interesting person. I've watched some podcasts of him where he just gets very angry, and he's very righteous about his beliefs, and he just knows he's right. And if you disagree with him or you criticize his theory, I can't watch him anymore. He's too emotionally dysregulated and unhinged. But his presentation on natural law is very thorough and very good. If you can get beyond his personality, which he talks about a lot. He's like, I'm just giving you the message. Don't worry about my personality. A lot of people hate him. So anyway, I don't necessarily agree that we should just let people do things. I do believe that communities need to have institutions like police and law enforcement and potentially prisons and capital punishment and all kinds of stuff. I mean, I think different communities need different things in order to prevent crime and violence. But the next part of natural law is included in that presentation, and he talks a lot about the non-aggression principle. And the non-aggression principle is, if someone aggresses against you, you have the right to defend yourself for as long as that aggression persists. And on top of that, you have no right to aggress on another without the threat of aggression yourself. Meaning, if somebody's attacking you or trying to steal your stuff, you have the right to defend yourself in that moment for as long as the aggression persists. So, for example, somebody comes up to you on the street and has a knife and says, "Give me your money." You have the right to commit aggression, and he doesn't call it violence because violence is a violation. Violence is you preemptively or you aggressing on a person without provocation, or just because you want to steal their stuff, or just because you want to hurt them, or because they emotionally hurt you, or they made you angry, whatever. That's violence. Self-defense is separate from violence. Self-defense is not violence, at least according to the non-aggression principle. Self-defense is its own self-contained thing. So, and I really, really do agree with that. If someone is attacking you or trying to take your stuff by force, you have the right to defend yourself, and you have the right to react with equal measure. You know, if somebody just has their fists, and is trying to hurt you, well, yes, I mean, can you use a weapon? Sure, because, you don't know what they can do with their fists. But then the other part of it is, once the aggression is non-existent, then you have to stop. Meaning, somebody comes up at you with a knife, you disarm them with your self-defense, and maybe you get a punch or two in and they decide it's not worth it and they start running. Well, you can't chase after them and shoot them in the back or stab them in the back. That would be violence, because the threat no longer exists. You need to let them get away and leave. Now, if they were running to hurt another person, well, then you have the right to defend that person as well. But if they're just running to flee and get away, then the aggression no longer exists, and you no longer have the right to aggress, commit violence. And that's kind of how the law reads stuff too. If you push somebody away or hit them and they stop their violent behavior, well, you don't have the right to go after them and hit them 6 more times. And you'll see this over and over in court of law, where somebody will say, I guess it's called the excessive use of force, or, the threat no longer existed and you still were emotionally dysregulated enough to aggress against them. And that's a real tricky thing, because, if somebody's threatening your life, sometimes you have the right to take their life, and sometimes you don't. And where's that line? That's the tricky part, is where's that line? Where do you have to stop? And in this day and age, a court and a jury will potentially decide that for you. There's no cut and dry answer to that. It's just up to how it looks, how the other people perceive it to be, and what they decide your fate will be. So that's kind of my journey of self-defense and my thinking and my philosophy on it. And, you could extrapolate it into politics and, oppression. What is your right to stop the oppression of yourself and your community if it's at the threat of violence? If somebody is constantly coming, to your place of business and stealing stuff from you or threatening to steal stuff or whatever, I mean, what is an equal measure of self-defense at that point? So it can get pretty nuanced in terms of, if I think about like kingdoms back in the feudal era, where these peasants, they would work the fields on the king's land, and the tax collectors would come around and collect the tax, and if you didn't pay your tax, they'd beat you up or murder you or whatever they wanted to do. And because it was the king's land, he could do whatever he wanted to. Is that oppression? Or, I mean, the peasants, they can't just move all the time. They can't just find their own land, because all that land, especially in Europe, was owned. So they were being oppressed, and at some point that oppression turns into the right to self-defense. So when the peasants band together and they build weapons, and the next time the tax collector comes, they kill the tax collector, and then the king brings the army and tries to kill the peasants, and then the peasants defend themselves, and it's kind of whoever's got more power will win that battle. And nowadays in Western culture, we have the courts of law that are supposed to handle that kind of oppression, and that's our form of self-defense now, is contract law. And it's a much more civilized way of handling disagreements than fighting, but it still can be violent. It can be the removal of your things or your life, and it can be oppressive depending on how fair the court system is and whether they're following the non-aggression principle or not. A lot of court systems don't follow that non-aggression principle. They're very aggressive, and they're corrupt, and so it can go into contract law, that those principles in natural law. It's not just physical violence, it's the threat of physical violence. If you don't do this, you will have people with guns show up at your door and take you to a prison. That's a threat of violence. If you resist, you will be beaten or thrown in a car or harmed in order for us to carry out your punishment. And again, there's just all kinds of ways to look at that, and all kinds of nuances and all kinds of situations. So those are my thoughts around that. I think it's really interesting and important to consider all of that. I think pacifism is a misguided ideology. I think the idea that you can just lay down and take the beatings and things will change. I don't have enough faith in the current state of human consciousness that that's the right way to go. I think you just end up being aggressed upon with no recourse if you don't defend yourself. I think you do have to defend yourself at some point, but there's a finite window and that's when you're being aggressed upon. That's the most important thing to understand, especially when you're dealing with courts. And so a lot of self-defense training, the majority of it is training about situational awareness and training about what an equal use of force is, because not only are we dealing with our own physical safety in the moment, we're dealing with the ramifications of the court system and the legal system. Because if you hit somebody, I don't care if it was 100% justified, you will go to jail for a little while and you will face a court, because that is most people will want to say that was, you assaulted that person, whether it was defense or not. If you pull a gun, whether it's self-defense or not, even if you don't point that gun at somebody, you're going to jail. In this day and age, you are going to jail, and you will have to defend yourself, and it will cost you money and your reputation and potentially your job. And so we talk a lot about that in self-defense class, because especially when you become proficient in a self-defense art, and you can actually hurt somebody pretty easily with your skill. I mean, I think hopefully most dojos teach that you don't just go around picking fights when you have a certain amount of skill just because you want to show somebody how tough you are. You use it and preserve it only for emergency situations where you need it. And while that's legally sound, and it's also morally sound, you know. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I hope that brings some clarity to any of you that have questioned that or wondering about what's my stance on all this. Highly recommend, if you can get past Mark Passio's personality and personal stance on politics and government, watch that natural law presentation that he has, and you'll come a long way. And last thing I'll just talk about is situational awareness. And if you watched my previous video, this is like the red pill of self-defense. It's like, don't walk around in the world as if you trust the world. Walk around in the world as if there's a threat, especially when you're in a congested area or a downtown in a metropolitan area where there are more people around. The more people there are, the more chances you have of somebody bad, a bad person being around you. And keep your distance from people, scan the area, don't go into places that have, drinking and drugs. Those things, lower people's inhibitions and heighten people's, willingness to get into physical altercations with people. Avoid all that at all costs whenever you can. And if you have a high degree of situational awareness, you will avoid 99% of potential self-defense situations. And so walk around the world as if you don't trust it, And if you do that, you will keep yourself safe. But on the off chance that you get backed into a corner, or somebody is hurting one of your friends or family, and you can't avoid being defensive, well, I think it's absolutely imperative, especially for men and women, to have some sort of self-defense capability. And there are a few things which maybe I'll talk about or demonstrate later. If you have one or two maneuvers, two things that you can do, and you master those things, you can get yourself out of a lot of situations. A lot of masters of martial arts, if you watch a guy named Jeff Thompson on YouTube, he's got like two or three things that he does. And if you mastered those two or three things that he knows how to do and he can show you how to do, you probably will never get hurt in a physical self-defense situation. And we can talk about what, one of his principles is, just like in Cobra Kai, strike first. But you got to know when the aggression is present and real and imminent before you do that, especially when it comes to the courts. So we can go into more nuance later, but I thought I'd give you my overall take on it. And let me know what you guys think. Please like and subscribe if you're at the end of this video and you're hearing me. You listen to the whole thing and you still haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel or followed me on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, please do so now. It really helps me. It's the only thing I'm asking. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I just want to be a voice for you to gain some wisdom and insight that I have gained over my years walking through this world. Rock on.